The slap hit the bin, so hard the metal rang like a bell. Amara stood frozen, watching the food she had been rationing her hunger around all day slide down the inside of the trash can. The rice, the small portion of braised tofu she had set aside. Gone. Madame Park's hand was still in the air, fingers splayed, the satisfaction on her face so complete it looked rehearsed. So the servant thinks she deserves to eat now. Amara's jaw tightened. She didn't move. Every nerve in her body told her to say something, to reach into that bin and retrieve what was rightfully hers, but she stood very still, the way a person stands still when they've learned that stillness is the only armor they have left. "I worked since morning," she said quietly. You stole food today." Madame Park cut across her words like a blade. "Did you think I didn't see you?" The kitchen workers exchanged glances. Nobody spoke. Mr. Han stood near the back counter, eyes down, hands clasped in front of him like he was attending a funeral. Amara shook her head slowly. "I didn't steal anything. I saw you outside." Madame Park's voice rose, theatrical and sharp, performing her fury for an audience she knew would never challenge her. "Giving MY food to some random child on the street. My food. From MY kitchen." The whispers started. Soft, uncomfortable, the sound of people who wanted to disappear. Madame Park stepped forward and kicked the bin toward Amara's feet. The clang echoed off the tile floors, off the stainless steel counters, off the faces of every person in that kitchen who looked away. "If you're so hungry," Madame Park said, dropping her voice to something low and amused, "eat it from there." Amara looked at the bin. She looked at the food inside it. She did not cry. That was the thing about Amara Akoy that no one in that kitchen fully understood yet. She did not cry. She absorbed. She stored. She endured things that would have broken other people, and she kept standing. She lowered her head. The kitchen was silent. And then the windows turned white. Headlights, powerful and sudden, flooded the front of the restaurant. Then a second set. Then a third. Then a fourth. The customers near the windows stood from their tables. Someone pressed their face to the glass. 4 black SUVs had pulled up outside. One after another, smooth and deliberate, like a procession that had no reason to rush because it had never been told no. If you've ever felt like the world moved against you while you were simply trying to survive, stay with this story. It's about to change. The manager bolted from the back. Mr. Han, who spent most of his working life navigating the narrow space between Madame Park's cruelty and the staff's suffering, rushed toward the front door with the expression of a man who already knew that whatever was outside was beyond anything his training had prepared him for. The SUV doors opened. Men stepped out. Large men. Men in black suits who moved with the specific kind of stillness that came not from peace but from absolute readiness. They fanned out around the entrance with practiced efficiency, and the customers inside the restaurant went quiet in the way that only happens when a room collectively senses danger. Then Kang Junhyuk walked through the door. He was not a tall man by any remarkable standard. He was not loud. He did not gesture or announce himself. He simply entered, and the room reorganized itself around his presence the way water reorganizes itself around stone. His face was calm. His coat was dark. His eyes moved slowly across the restaurant, touching every corner, every face, every detail, with the unhurried patience of someone who had never once in his adult life needed to prove a point twice. Madame Park had come out from the kitchen at the sound of commotion, her face already arranged into the expression she used for wealthy customers. The smile died before it finished forming. Junhyuk stopped in the center of the restaurant. He let the silence hold for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was so calm it was almost gentle. "Someone here fed my son today." Nobody breathed. Because everyone in that room, every single person, knew exactly who Kang Junhyuk was. His name was not spoken carelessly in this city. It was the kind of name that appeared in conversations only when necessary, and then only in lowered voices. He controlled more of the city's underbelly than the city itself cared to acknowledge. He was feared not because of what he had done to people, but because of what everyone understood he was entirely capable of doing and had chosen so far not to. Madame Park's perfectly maintained composure cracked at the edges. Her fingers found the hem of her jacket. In the kitchen, Amara had not moved. She had heard the commotion. She had heard the silence that followed. She stood beside the bin that still held her dinner, and she waited with the practiced patience of someone who had been waiting her entire life. She did not yet know what any of this had to do with her. But it was about to find out. Earlier that afternoon, during the 15-minute break Madame Park grudgingly allowed between the lunch rush and the start of dinner prep, Amara had stepped out through the restaurant's back alley exit and walked to the side street where the deliveries came in. She had her lunch with her, the same meal she had portioned out that morning from her own bag, because eating from the restaurant's kitchen was a luxury Madame Park had made abundantly clear was not included in the employment arrangement for cleaning staff. She sat on the concrete step and unwrapped her container. She heard the sound before she saw him. A small, muffled crying. The kind of crying a child does when they've been frightened for long enough that the fear has started to exhaust itself. She stood and followed the sound around the corner of a parked delivery van and found him crouched between the van and the wall, knees pulled to his chest, face wet, eyes wide. He was maybe 6 years old. Clean clothes, very clean, the kind of clean that spoke of people who had someone paid specifically to ensure cleanliness. But his face was terrified, and his small hands were shaking, and he was alone in a way that no child that age should ever be alone on a city street. Amara crouched down in front of him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, it's okay, I've got you." The boy looked at her, his crying slowed. "Are you lost?" He nodded, one small, devastated nod. She sat beside him on the ground, right there on the dirty concrete, and she opened her container. She broke her lunch in half. She held out the larger portion. "Are you hungry?" He looked at the food, he looked at her, he reached out and took it. They sat together quietly for a few minutes. Amara ate her half slowly, watching the street, watching for anyone who might be looking for him. The boy ate with the focused intensity of a child who had been hungrier than he expected to be. After a while he looked at her with the directness only children have. "Aren't you hungry?" She smiled. "I'll eat later." He seemed to accept this completely, the way children accept things that adults would question to death. She pulled out her phone and tried gently to find out who he belonged to. He gave her his first name, Min-jun. He did not give her a last name. He said he had been with people, but then he had gone to look at something and then he couldn't find them. She nodded. She knew the shape of that story. She sat with him until she heard voices calling from the next block over. The panic in those voices was significant. She stood and walked him to the corner, and the men who came running toward them moved with such desperate speed that she stepped back instinctively. They scooped the boy up. One of them spoke rapidly into an earpiece. None of them spoke to Amara. Min-jun looked back at her over the shoulder of the man carrying him. "My dad will thank you," he said with complete certainty. She smiled and watched them disappear around the corner. She went back inside. She did not think about it again until the headlights came. Back in the restaurant, the silence had reached the specific quality of silence that precedes something irreversible. And then from the doorway, in a small clear voice that cut through every thread of tension in the room the way only a child's voice can, a word rang out. "Apple." Min-jun came running through the door and past the legs of the men in suits and into the center of the restaurant, his small feet loud on the floor, his eyes scanning the room with the searching urgency of someone looking for the most important thing in the world. Jun Hyuk's entire body changed. It was subtle but total. The cold command in his posture softened by precisely 1 degree, and in a man like him, 1 degree was everything. He turned and his son ran into his legs and he put one hand on the boy's head, and for just a moment he was not the most feared man in the city. He was a father. Minjun, his voice was different, lower, something private in it. "Appa, she's here." Minjun pulled at his father's hand and turned, scanning the room. His eyes traveled past the waiters, past the customers, past Madame Park, who was standing very still near the kitchen entrance. Then his eyes found the kitchen doorway. He saw Amara. His face broke into a smile that was entirely unaware of itself, the smile of a child who has no calculation in them yet. He ran. He pushed through the kitchen door and crossed the floor and wrapped both arms around Amara's waist and held on with the grip of someone who had been afraid today and was not afraid anymore. "This is her," he announced to the room at large, to his father, to everyone. "This is the nice lady who gave me food." The restaurant gasped. Every head turned. Madame Park's face moved through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, realization, then something that looked like the first cold touch of fear. Junhyuk walked into the kitchen. He was unhurried. He looked at Amara, and she looked back at him, one hand resting instinctively on his son's back, her face composed with the same quiet dignity she had been holding all day, even when dignity had cost her everything. He nodded at her, a small acknowledgement that somehow carried enormous weight. Then his eyes moved. They found the trash bin. He looked at it for a moment, the overturned container, the food inside, the visible evidence of what had just happened in this room. His gaze moved to Mr. Han. Mr. Han looked at the floor. His gaze moved to the kitchen staff. They said nothing. His gaze moved to Madame Park. And Madame Park, who had spent 30 years ensuring that everyone around her was smaller than her, who had built her entire world on the certainty that she was untouchable, felt the architecture of that certainty begin to crack. "You threw away food," Junhyuk said. His voice was still calm. It was always calm. That was the terrible thing about it. Food meant for the woman who kept my son safe today. Madame Park opened her mouth. "I didn't know who I had no idea." "That's not what I asked." She closed her mouth. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Amara once more, then at his son, who was still holding Amara's hand and watching his father with the trusting certainty of a child who knew, absolutely, that his father would handle this. Junhyuk turned to the man standing closest to him and said 2 words. "Buy it." The man already had his phone out. Madame Park's voice came out strange and high. What does that mean? You can't. This is my restaurant. I built this. You cannot simply." "The offer has already been made." Junhyuk looked at her without any particular emotion. "You can accept it and leave tonight with something, or you can refuse." He paused. "I would encourage you to accept it." This is the part of the story where we pause for just a moment, because what you've just witnessed is something worth sitting with. A woman who had nothing, who gave her only meal to a child she didn't know, who was humiliated for the very act of kindness that was about to change her life. If this story is moving something in you, you're in the right place. You are part of the Velvet Empire family now. And before we continue, we want to take a moment to speak a blessing over your life. Not because it's scripted, because you deserve it. May good health and genuine strength find their way back to your body. May any illness that has been trying to attach itself to you be turned away. May your home be a place of real peace, not the performance of peace, but the kind that actually lets you breathe. May your children and grandchildren be guided and protected in spaces you cannot follow them into. May the people they encounter be kind to them. May the opportunities they deserve find them before the ones that would harm them. May your finances stabilize in this season. May provision come from directions you did not anticipate. May the weight of uncertainty about money begin to lift. May wisdom come to you in your hardest decisions. May the clarity you've been asking for arrive. May your silent struggles, the ones no one sees, begin to ease. May you live long. May you live with dignity. May joy find you in ordinary moments and stay. If this blessing resonates with you, type Amen in the comments. And if you haven't yet, subscribing to this channel is how you make sure these stories keep finding you. You are why the Velvet Empire family exists. You matter here. Now back to the restaurant, because Madame Park was not done. She had spent too many years being the most powerful person in every room she entered to simply fold. Her hands were shaking, but her voice found something that resembled its old authority. Brittle and hollow, but still present. You think you can walk in here with your men and your money and take what I built with my own hands? Her voice cracked on the last word. I have connections. I have lawyers. I will fight this every step. Jun Hyuk had already turned away from her. That was the response, the turning away. It was worse than any threat because it communicated with absolute precision that she was no longer a factor in any calculation he was making. She had moved from the category of opponent into the category of detail, and details were handled by other people. Mr. Han stepped forward. His voice was very small. Madame Park, he paused. The offer is very fair. I've seen the number. She turned on him with the fury of someone who had lost the war and was trying to hold the last hill. You, she breathed. You would betray me now, after everything. I'm not betraying you, Mr. Han said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there before, something that had been freed. I'm telling you the truth. You should take it. Madame Park looked around the kitchen, at the staff who had absorbed her cruelty for years, at Mr. Han who had never once stood up to her until this moment, at Amara, who stood in the middle of all of it still holding Min Jun's hand, watching everything unfold with eyes that were tired and clear and not triumphant. Amara was not enjoying this. That was perhaps what struck Madame Park hardest in that moment, the thing she would think about later in the silence of whatever came next. The woman she had humiliated was not standing there collecting the satisfaction of reversal. She simply stood, present, unchanged, as though her worth had never actually been connected to what Madame Park thought of her. That, more than anything, was the thing Madame Park could not recover from. She signed. She left. The kitchen exhaled. Min Jun looked up at Amara. Is it over? Amara looked down at him. Yes, she said, I think so. He nodded, satisfied, and leaned against her arm. 7 days later, Amara stood on the pavement outside the restaurant and looked at the sign. It was the same building, same windows, same door with the small bell that rang when you pushed it open, but the sign was new. The lettering was simple and the background was clean, and the name of the previous owner was nowhere on it. She pushed the door open. The bell rang. The kitchen staff were already inside, prepping for the morning. When they saw her, something moved through the room. Not fear, not performance. Something quieter than that. Respect that had been paid honestly. Mr. Han came forward. He had the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was now discovering that no amount of rehearsal fully prepares you. Mr. Kang, he said carefully, transferred the ownership documentation 3 days ago. Everything is processed. He paused. It's yours. Amara stood very still. The words rearranged themselves in her mind several times before they settled. She thought about the morning she had started this job. The bucket and the mop and the cold water from the tap that took 3 minutes to warm. She thought about every plate she had cleaned, every floor she had scrubbed, every small humiliation she had absorbed and stored away in the place inside herself, where she kept the things she refused to let destroy her. She thought about 15 minutes on a concrete step, and a small boy crying beside a parked van, and a meal she had split in half without a second thought, because there had never been a second thought to have. The door opened behind her. She turned. Min Jun came in at full speed, coat half on, face bright with the uncomplicated joy of someone who had been looking forward to this all week. "Appa said we're eating here tonight," he announced to the room, to Amara, to anyone within earshot. He grabbed her hand. "Will you sit with us?" Amara looked down at him, and she smiled. Not a polite smile, not the smile she had learned to use as armor. A real one, the kind that starts somewhere deep and arrives at the face without permission. Jun Hyuk came through the door behind his son, his usual cold composure in place. He stopped when he saw her face, and something in his expression, barely there, just the smallest shift at the edges, acknowledged it. He gave her a single nod. She returned it. The staff moved, chairs scraped. The kitchen came alive with the sounds of preparation. The smell of garlic and sesame and something warming on the stove began to move through the room. Amara stood at the center of the restaurant that was now hers, her hand held by a 6-year-old boy who had no idea what he had changed, and she breathed. Just breathed. Because sometimes the world takes from you quietly and for a very long time, and then in a single afternoon it gives back in a way you never could have manufactured or planned or asked for. Sometimes the meal you sacrifice is the one that feeds something much larger than hunger. Sometimes kindness is not repaid because the universe is fair. It is repaid because someone saw it, because a child remembered, because a father paid attention. Amara had spent years surviving. That night, for the first time in longer than she could trace, she sat down at a table in a warm room and she did something harder than surviving. She allowed herself to begin. If this story moved you, drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which character you felt the most. Tell us what moment stayed with you. And if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe to the Velvet Empire family so that the next story finds you before you even know you needed it. Your presence here is what keeps these stories alive. Until the next one, take care of yourself. The Velvet Empire family is grateful you stayed. Because some people give their last meal away. And the world, every now and then, notices.